Welcome, everyone. This is the very first episode of Money Sense with Sheandra. I'm Sheandra Michelle Newton. I'm the executive producer and host of this brand new series that's focused on helping you make smarter financial decisions. Money Sense with Sheandra isn't your typical financial talk show. It's a financial coaching show. Each episode, I bring in a financial expert to coach us through how to manage and improve or maximize our finances so that we can achieve our financial goals. Speaking of goals, one goal that I have is to become financially independent. Financial independence can mean different things to different people. For me, financial independence means I don't have to rely on a paycheck to survive. For many of us, if we miss one paycheck, our whole life goes into disarray. With financial independence, however, we have enough savings, investments, and other streams of income to not only cover our expenses, but also to live the lifestyle we desire. Now, financial independence is a very lofty goal, and in order to achieve it, we need to have a plan. If you've been following the show on social media, YouTube, or podcast platforms, you'll know that here on Money Sense with Sheandra, we have an in-house financial planner. His name is Nathaniel Butler, and his company, Drewber Solutions, helps people like you and me create a financial plan. A financial plan is a roadmap that outlines in detail how we're going to achieve our financial goals. When I sat down with Nathaniel to record today's coaching session, he shared the components of a financial plan. You can find the list of components online on moneysensewithsheandra.com in the financial planning blog post. Nathaniel shared that a critical component of a financial plan is creating a budget. And that's why, in today's episode, we're going to learn how to create and manage a household budget. We talked about the financial plan, the components of the financial plan. Where does the budget, that household budget, fall in to the financial plan?
This is a really great question. So most persons, like I said, I started off by saying in regards to the financial planning, that the financial planning is not solely strictly just budgeting, but budgeting plays it's the foundational role. It's literally in the first component of the financial plan, where we more so refer to it as more as cash management. And the reason why we refer to it as cash management, because all budgeting is, it is a document, but all budgeting is just a plan of monitoring and telling cash where to go. So we have cash coming in, which is our salaries or our income, and then we have a lot of cash going out.
A lot.
And so and so we have to be mindful. So you asked me the question, like, what is the role of it? And what literally comes to mind for me, especially when I'm sitting down and I'm talking to individual, and even when I'm talking to you, one of the things that I want you to walk away with an appreciation of is the budget, or putting a budget together for your own individual life. It helps raise the financial awareness. What I mean by that is, when you sit down and you see your income on a piece of paper outside of your pay stub, or the total or the subtotal of all your incomes on a piece of paper or a document of sorts, and then you also see all of the things that you spend your money on one or two page document. It raises a level of financial awareness, in the sense of you understand now how you've been operating out of life. And I find that most persons don't like that level of certainty, or they would prefer to be in the unknown. The second thing it does is it helps you crystallize your financial goals. When you have a budget that is in place, I'm telling you, you begin to see where milestones are achievable, where accomplishments and achievements are attainable. And last but not least, and this is the part that I find that most persons are really resistant when it comes down to the role that a budget plays in financial planning, It's really a standpoint of financial discipline. Some persons, clients, and even you who are watching us, you may feel like the reason why I'm not going to put a budget in place is because it's restrictive. You find that the budget restricts you from doing certain things which you may want to do or put limitations. But believe it or not, a budget helps you be extremely different. It helps create focus, it helps create boundaries, it helps create some level of self denial. But the most important thing at the end of the day, it creates self control.
Yeah.
So I would say awareness, definitely making sure that you clearly define and achieve your financial goals, but it also creates financial discipline. At the end of that, you will have a greater level of self control.
Why do you think it is? Because oftentimes, particularly at the beginning of the year, right? We trying to
Mm.
get it together. This year could be the year we get our finances in order. We start out, we on Google Sheets, putting our budget together.
Oh man,
But I would say by about maybe 3 months in, we don't see that Google Sheet, for the rest of the year.
you're
And
right.
so
You're right.
why do you think it is that people don't budget at all, or that they don't keep up with it rather?
There's psychological barriers, and also there's a culture of money avoidance. I do not want to talk about money. It makes me uncomfortable. I do not want to know the state that I am in as it pertains to my money. When growing up in certain environments, they told us that counting your money, watching money, saving money is bad, or I feel like I should enjoy life, so I need to spend this money. I don't want anybody to dictate and tell me how I should spend my own money. And so these are the emotions and feelings and values that erupt when you think of why people don't either create a budget or even stick to a budget. Like you said, at the beginning of the year we have high lofty goals, what we want out of life, but in order for it to be achieved, you have to have a plan and you got to stick to it. And you have to stick to it over a period of time. But I would say to you, off the cuff, psychological barriers and money avoidance is definitely number one. And if you're listening to me, how do you determine that psychological barrier or money avoidance is something that is holding you back or is keeping you away from budgeting? It's simple. It comes down to several things. When you think of your personal financial situation, do you feel a level of fear? Do you feel a level of anxiety? Do you feel like a lack of confidence in handling your finances? And even if you were to feel, have, or experience those emotions, knowing that you have to get certain information, knowing that you have to put yourself in certain environments, does that make you uncomfortable? Does it make you uncomfortable when somebody uncovers certain truths about your spending habit? Do you feel some level of emotional discomfort? Or do you feel that you resort by nature, not even sometimes even being conscious of it, but you feel like you resort to procrastination or some level of avoidance of being in those environments? You may be experiencing some level of a psychological barrier that is preventing you from exceeding or excelling in the area of money.
I think another one is also feeling defeated, a feeling
Yeah.
of defeat when it comes to your finances and your financial situation. Like I barely even making these builds, where I go in, putting together a plan and all of that. I just trying to make it month by month or week by week, and you just feel defeated. And so you don't necessarily have the motivation to say, okay, now, let me get this together. You just basically holding on, you know?
No. So I love what you're saying. And here's the reality. Most persons are suffering in silence in the
Yeah.
area of money.
Nathaniel is right. Many of us are suffering in silence in the area of money. But for many of us, it's not our fault. Most of you who are listening and watching live in the Bahamas. Nathaniel reminded me that the cost of living in the Bahamas is one of the highest in the world. And while our incomes may be higher compared to other countries in the region, for some of us, it's just not enough to cover the high cost of living. Additionally, many of us were never educated in money management. We weren't taught how to properly manage and maximize our finances. And so when you have the fact that we live in one of the most expensive countries in the world, the salary in many sectors isn't enough to cover the high cost of living, and that there's a lack of financial education, it's no wonder so many of us are struggling financially. Nathaniel said it's almost as if we were set up to fail. But here's the good news. We don't have to fail. Every household has a different family dynamics.
Mhm.
Who all needs to be involved in the budgeting process? And you had shared with me last week sometime
Mhm.
about your own process in your household. I want you to
Yes.
share that with our listening and viewing audience as well. But talk about who should be involved in the budgeting process.
I have a very controversial view. Let me come out the gate and say it. I believe it should be nominalized, but however, we live in the Bahamas, we live in the Caribbean, it's very controversial. So let me tell you what happens though, or what's happening today, and then I'll share who I think should be at the table and why. The first thing I've come to discover, and most of our listening audience is probably doing this themselves, the person who's the primary earner in the house usually takes on this position of having their own meeting with themselves and paying the bills. There is no involvement of the other members of the household. So there are many households today that operate like that. And here's the challenge with that. So when you think of the primary earner, there's a couple dynamics that are at play. The first one is many of those individuals who operate like that, they're operating off of a value system that says that I need to be the provider for my family. So they take personal responsibility for their life and the life of everyone that comes under their household. And because they're the primary earner, they feel like they have the most say in regards to how the money should be spent. And here's where we have to really analyze this. So because they're the primary earner, they know what cash is coming in, right? Remember I said that the budget is cash coming in and also what is going out. So we get that cash coming in part. Why I think that this is not probably the most ideal method or person who should be in the meeting alone is simply this. There are other stakeholders that are in under the roof of that primary earner. They contribute or have a lot of say of what is going out. And sometimes if you're not aware or cautious, you will find yourself developing mentalities, habits, mindsets amongst those who are not sitting to that table with you that ultimately affect, disrupt the spending pattern or plan that you're trying to put in place. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a really practical example of what I'm saying. So, for our listeners, and you could do this assessment in your own life, if you're one who sits, you're the primary earner in your house, and you sit down and you kind of outline or dictate or allocate money for all of the items that you believe are critical items for spending within your household. Here's what you're doing if you have others in your household who you're not allowing to sit to the table. If you have a child, and that child is not made aware. Now, I know some persons feel uncomfortable making their children aware of what they make, and I get that. Wherever you stand on that spectrum, share out of the level of your comfortability. However, I do believe that all children should be made of how much the household spends, and especially how they contribute to the spending in the household as well. Because when you don't make them aware, you now have a child who will throw temper tantrums when you walk inside the food store. They want this, they want that. And remember now, these stores are set up in a way to appeal to emotion. And that child will throw a temper tantrum simply because they do not know your budget. They do not know how much you have. They do not know. They feel that all resources under the roof of that household is really for them and them alone. And it doesn't get better. It gets worse as the child get older. You can imagine now you have a preteen on your hand and you're telling them that they can't go away, they can't get that game, they can't go out with their friends because there's no money. They're not even in the position they want to accept or receive what you're saying. And then it gets
Hmm.
worse by the time as they get off it's time for them to go off to school. And the reason why I'm saying that they should be at the table, but when they're not at the table, they will pick a college that you cannot afford, and you will feel obligated because you feel, because from the moment they were born up until now you felt that there was the need to give them a better quality of life. I'm not knocking that, I'm doing the same thing as well, but at the same time giving them that better quality of life, you need to expose them to the cost of this better quality of life,
Yeah.
because it is a partnership, because they're not earning anything at this time, so they have to work with what you have coming in, because if you don't, it creates that anxiety, it creates that stress, it creates that uncomfortability, especially in the area of money. This is why people don't want to check it, because they already are afraid of the unknown. And if it becomes known, they know that they may not be able to keep up or sustain the lifestyle that they're creating for their child. And that child, it doesn't stop there. That child now comes off age. And let's just say that child goes into a relationship, whether it's a male or a female. For those who listen to me, you might be looking at your spouse in a particular way after what I'm about to say. If that person has never been exposed to spending plan, or have never been exposed to goals that have been set up to increase the level of income coming inside the household, you're dealing with somebody who sees budgeting as restrictive, who sees budgeting as a means of limiting and stopping freedom, who sees budgeting as something that is adverse for them to live their desired lifestyle, which in actuality is the very tool to live it, is the very tool to create the level of freedom. So it brings me to my second point, where I find very common in a lot of households. You will find that maybe the two partners, whether they're married or not married, or maybe it could be a daughter and mother combination, or a mother and son combination, or a married couple, where there's more like a partner decision making going on, where the two primary earners, or they may not even be primary earners, one may be a primary earner, the other one is the person who makes sure all the bills are taken care of, and it could be either the male or the female. You find that more of that is happening, and that is good because it keeps a level of transparency and communication going. But like I said, the major contributors to the spending part of it will always be the children. And you have to ensure that at least they are aware of the limits of their spending. And at the same time, to make them aware that if they want certain things, it's better to expose them now, where they may need to get a job, or they may need to do chores around the house to earn their allowance. Now I know how some people feel. Oh, I don't want my child to do chores around the house to earn allowance because I'm creating a certain kind of mindset. Well, I'll tell you this much. You do not want to go into retirement with a dependent child because you took care of them their entire life. And mind you, you even school them. They have a degree, they're making money, but they still have an expectation for you to pay their bills. A lot of persons who are listening to us today, I'm telling you, they are struggling with that now. They're struggling trying to figure out, if I've done everything for you possible, why don't you help me out financially? And it's simple. It has nothing to do with intelligence. It has nothing to do with income ability. It strictly has something to do with, over a period of years, 20, 30, 40 years, you've created an individual who has a mindset that as long as I live on the earth and as long as you live on the earth, you will take care of me.
Your son, you were sharing how
Yes.
with budgeting, your son is only how old?
So my son is 5 years old, and what we did was we made sure. So brings me to the last point I was going to say in regards to the type of who should be in the room. It should be inclusive. Every single individual under that roof needs to be a part of the meeting. Now, you
Yeah.
may have the portion of the meeting where you discuss income, and you may not want them there, and that's fine. But when it comes down to the spending part of it, they need to be inside the room. They need to see or hear how much certain bills cost, such as the utilities, and maybe if you have your child who's in private school, how much the tuition costs, how much grocery in the food store costs, how much the family vacation costs. And once they are become sensitized to these level of expenses, you'll see your child react in a different way. There's only one or three things that's going to happen. One, they're going to realize, okay, we don't make enough money here for us to do certain things. And there's no shame in that. There's no
Yeah.
shame in that. Because, like I said, once again, we live in one of the most expensive countries in the world. Everything around us is going up but our salaries. Everything around is going up but our income. And it's not keeping up with the buying power. So what has to happen? Child realize, hey, if I need money, I gotta go make my money on my own. And that's good. That is good because it takes some expenses away from you. And the second thing is it helps them to become very responsible at a very young age. My son sometimes helps out his grandfather, who in turns at the end of working with him over during the weekends and assisting him in some of the things that he has to do on the weekend, he gives him a little stipend. And as a result of that stipend, when there's time for him to certain things he wants or he buys certain things, and then we also try to create a culture with him of you got to give back, whether it's to a civic society or for those who are faith based, they can give back to their local faith based institution. And then last but not least, there's a portion of it you have to save. You have to save for the next day. You have to save and put your money aside. And I think through the combination of that and him seeing the household expenses, being aware of what certain things cost and having that appreciation, he said something that was very interesting. I don't know if I ever shared it with you. He said, by the time as I reach the age of 18 and I graduate school, I want to be in my own house.
Yeah. And you said he's
And
5 now.
He's 5 now. This is not something we develop. Just from him being in the environment, he has years of exposure that his mother and I had never had. He has, and what's going to do though, overall, it's going to prepare him and he's going to be extremely intentional. And more importantly, the one thing that he had over myself, and I'm not ashamed to say it, and my wife was a little bit better than I was, but over myself, in the sense of he will be very open to talking about money when he enters into a love relationship
Yeah.
because that's his foundation. That's what he's seen, and he's be very open to being accountable.
Nathaniel's son is just 5 years old, and he's already gaining financial literacy skills. Before we continue our session with Nathaniel, I want to drive home Nathaniel's point about the importance of exposing your children to good financial habits like budgeting. Growing up with two college educated parents, education was very important in my household. But I can't recall being educated in the area of money management. I don't think I ever looked at a utility bill or a budget until I became an adult. I know you may feel you don't want to burden your children with your bills, but it's important that you pass on good money habits like budgeting now so that your children grow up to be financially responsible adults. And this idea of everyone being at the table who's in the household, this is because we have also households where there's multiple generations. Grammy lives
Yes,
there, auntie,
yes, yes.
cousin lives there, and so talk a little bit about that too. The importance of getting cousin, getting auntie who lives in the house, and to all come together.
So I'll say this: there are individuals who will say to me, "I hear you, Mr. Butler. It makes sense. It sounds good, but I'm not going to get my cousin and my grandmother to sit to the table." I get you. I understand. What you may have to do is for persons who are not willing to sit to the table in a formal sense, where we know that this set time is where we're going to talk about money and talk about our bills and talk about our expenses. And I can tell you for a fact, sitting down with so many households, there are persons who literally do it. Mommy and the children will sit down, whether male or female, you know. Daddy's no longer there, mommy's there, and she's sitting down with her adult children. Sometimes they might not even be in the house, but their children or the grandchildren of mommy will be in the house, and so they'll sit down with their mothers and they'll have the conversation. Okay, what are our expenses? What are the income? Okay, I realize I need to give you a little bit extra. But for those who have extended families or who are in an extended family household, and there might be persons who are not willing to sit to the table, then you have to kind of change into have what I call more informal sessions in the sense of keeping it very general. Let them know that you want to talk to them about some of the household expenses. Keep it very brief and short. Don't bombard them, but move at the pace that they're comfortable with and having certain conversations. And even though there might be the response that you're looking for immediately, but some persons they may not necessarily get it. You might get some resistance, you might get some apprehension, you might get, and you have to remember now, this is years and years of not being taught how to be financially responsible that is at work in that moment. And you cannot expect that adult to make the shift and change to your liking, especially now coming to this information. So what has to happen? It has to be over a period of time of sensitizing them. Remember I said earlier that having the budget raises financial awareness, but I also said earlier it helps create financial goals. So in you sharing, okay, this is the bills went up, BPL went up, or water and sewage went up, or the mortgage, I had to refinance, and now the mortgage is a little bit more. Um, or I have some health challenges, and now I have to go see the doctor. The doctor is telling me that it's going to cost this that I have to pay. Now there's that sensitivity if you keep sharing it, not from a nagging standpoint, but sharing it from a standpoint, okay, I might need you to contribute. I'm going to be short. I need you to give blah, blah, blah. I need you to know. And even sometimes showing them the bill, you find that they'll be more inclined to support it if they have some sense of financial responsibility, or more importantly, some love or devotion towards that particular family member. I'm not saying this is going to work out with everybody. I'm going to want to come out the gate and say that I'm not saying that this will work with everybody, but it will work with the far majority if you say it in a very loving way. Because at the end of the day, if they were to live on their own, they are the ones who have the greatest level of culture shock in regards to how much things cost and how expensive it is to live on your own.
What is the approach, the best approach to budgeting from the standpoint of frequency, how often we should be doing it? How do
Mhm.
we allocate? How should the income be allocated? Those sort of things.
Yeah, so I would say that when you talk about budgeting, it's just really a process. And once like you said, I love how you laid it out, the question, because this is usually what I use as well. Once you cover these three areas, then you're now prepared or ready to start the budgeting process. So for those of you who are listening to us, the first thing we have to decide upon is how frequent are we going to sit down and put a budget together? And that's critical. I would recommend that you put a budget together around your pay periods right before you get paid. Because what I find is that individuals are extremely intelligent. If you line up 10 of our listeners today and say, I'm going to put $1 million in your hand, but before I do it, tell us how you're going to spend the money, you're going to have intelligent answers. But then again, you put that $1 million in their hand and you sit back and watch for about a period of 3 months and you look at their habits, you see something completely different. So, in order to ensure that there's some level of financial success, we got to determine how frequent we can sit to the table. So I would say if you're paid weekly, create one master budget, but also have to check in every week when you get paid. So you make sure that you're allocating the money to where it needs to go. If you're paid bi-weekly, same principle applies. One master budget, but every 2 weeks you check in to make sure that certain things are paid. If you're paid monthly, then you only need one meeting right before you get paid, um, and make sure you allocate the resources where it needs to go. If you're in a household where you're having two primary earners, but they're paid at different times, well, make sure at the start of the month You sit down and create the master budget. And then from there, when those pay periods happen, you check in with the individuals to make sure that they're covering what they're supposed to cover. If you're dealing with a mix or an extended family where it's Grammy or parents and child or parents and two generations, that kind of thing, then there might need to be everybody pays what they are responsible for, but there's still a meeting where you come together to ensure that everything is paid. And if somebody had a challenge or struggle or some bill that surprisingly comes up, how you guys are going to approach it. I think if you take these approach in regards to frequency, you should be fine. Now, in regards to income allocation, this is critical, and this is a big one. This is the one where it gets a lot of people in a lot of trouble. So I want to keep this as simple as possible because there are many ways you can do it. I want to give you, in my view, what I use, but more importantly, some of the things that I've helped my clients overcome the challenges that they have in the area of budgeting. And you can choose which one fits you. Now, if you're somebody who's rigid, who's structured, and discipline is extremely easy to you, then you should follow the 50, 30, 20 model. That's 50, 50, 30, 20 model. So when you look at the total of your income or the combinations of your income, 50% of that has to go to all of your basic needs. And then the next 30% of that needs to go to all of your wants. And last but not least, you have 20% of that that needs to make sure go towards savings or saving goals. And when I say saving goals, it could be towards your emergency fund, it could be towards your pension, it could be towards your um, risk capital fund for you to make investments. It could be towards what we call a sinking fund. And we'll get into all of these items a little bit later in other shows. But the most important thing is 50% of it goes to your needs. The next 30% of it goes towards your wants. And the last 20% of it goes towards savings. Now, the alternative to that is for those who are extremely faith based or those who really want to see returns in your life, I would say 40% goes to needs, 30% goes to wants, 20% goes to savings, and the last 10% should go towards giving. I'm telling you, when you implement giving in your life, you will find that that comes back to you. I'm not sharing from a standpoint of what you may have heard in certain religious environments, but I'm saying that when I look at in my own life and some of the most wealthy persons that walk within the Bahamas and some of my clients, giving is a natural part of their plan. I'm telling you. So you have 40 for needs, 30 for wants, 20 for savings, and 10% for giving. Now, for those of you, and I started off in this category, believe it or not, I was even being a financial planner, being in financial services, where I was not disciplined with my money. So this is the area that I had to start off. It's called a zero-based budget. And essentially, you take your entire income, and what you do is before you even put the budget together, you look back in the last 6 months to about 12 months on how you spend your money on average. And you assign the average amount that you spend in the various different categories, right? So you start on the premise of what your habits look like. And some categories are going to be more ballooned or bigger than they should be. Some categories are just going to be not even realistic. It doesn't even make sense when you look at it on paper. And a lot of persons are very afraid of taking this approach, but it really is a reflection of habits. Once you would have identified where you stand in regards to your habits as the individual, and looking at the averages of what you would have spent in the various different categories, the next step is now to budget over the next 90 days over a 3 month span. So we're not just going to cut it to what we think it should be ideally because it's not going to work. You're setting yourself up to fail in the first instance in regards to your budget. What you're going to do is gradually reduce the areas that are below or bigger than they should be over a 3 month period. and reallocate or move that money to the areas that it should be, or move the money to a savings category so you could hit a particular goal in the area of your saving, whether it's a financial product you need to obtain, or establish an emergency fund, or being in position to make certain investment, whether it's a home investment or other investment products investment opportunities that you want to capitalize on. But the most important thing is there's the reallocation of the movement around of the money into the areas that it should be over a 90-day period. And I'm telling you, the first budget you put together and your execution of it, most persons are going to fail that. Let me come out the gate. You're going to probably fail your first budget, but the second and the third one, you'll find that you'll have now a greater level of control over those budgets. And by the time you hit the fourth one, you are a master.
Nathaniel talked about the 50-30-20 budget method, where you take your income and split it three ways: 50% to needs, 30% to wants, 20% to savings. He did mention that if you're someone who tithes or gives to charity, you'd split your income four ways to account for giving and adjust the percentages. Personally, the 50-30-20 method doesn't work for me. Remember at the beginning of this episode, I said one of my goals is to be financially independent, where I don't have to rely on a paycheck to survive. To me, the 50-30-20 method keeps me in a state where I'm just living paycheck to paycheck. It doesn't take into account changes I may need to make month to month in order to achieve certain financial goals, especially for that month. I like the zero-based budget method that Nathaniel talks about, where I take my income and I assign a dollar amount to every expense I have, both needs and wants, using historical data such as past spending. This gives me a clear picture of my spending habits and allows me to see specific spending habits that I may need to change. With the zero-based budget, I'm not focused on utilizing a designated percentage of my income for a specific category, but rather spending my income in a way that allows me to achieve my financial goals. I believe the 50-30-20 budget works, but for people who are comfortable financially and have already achieved certain financial goals and just need a bit of structure for their spending. For those of us, though, who haven't gotten there quite just yet, or whose income is barely covering expenses, I believe the zero-based budget is best. Let's talk about the expenses, right? Because on the budget, and this is something that I'm working on with the income section, having more line items there. But for a lot of people, that's just literally one line item. For a
Mhm.
lot of persons, it's their
Mhm.
salary,
Yeah, yeah,
and so we're gonna work on that. Having more multiple streams of income. But so let's
yeah.
talk about the expenses.
Okay.
Let's go through and break down what, because sometimes some people leave out expenses that they're not recording them. So let's just make sure everyone has some of those common expenses that
Mhm.
needs to be included in the budget. So first off, of course, uh, cost of housing. Let's talk about what we should have in there as it relates to the cost of housing.
Most persons find themselves in one of three positions. Either you're on your own and you're renting, so of course rent needs to be top of the list in housing, or you might be in a position where you have a mortgage. Well, of course, the mortgage needs to be top of the list for housing. But I've noticed over the years, and there might be people who are listening to us right now who may be in this third category where they live with someone. It doesn't have to be a family member, but they actually live with someone where they may not be required to pay rent or they may not be required to pay a mortgage. I would always be on the caution on the side of, well, even if it's not expected you to pay the rent or the mortgage or contribute at least, I would say let there be some level of contribution there that you give to the person who you are living. If you're an adult now, not talking about kids, but if you're an adult who's making money, I think there needs to be some level of contribution going back to the person who owns the home, or at least to the person who is renting. Outside of that, some other areas that you have to take in consideration, and I'm telling you, it just amazes me sometimes that what I find that, and I was once like this as well, where you have mental budget. And so sometimes when clients sit in front of me and they share, and I ask them what their expenses are, especially in the area of housing, I could see the ones who have mental budgets compared to the ones who actually document it. So a mental budget is persons who will be cognizant of the bigger expenses, but they would leave out some of the minor ones. And so it's so critical to understand that no, you have to make sure that you itemize everything. A couple other things that you have to take into consideration is things like home insurance. That's a big one for a lot of persons, depending on how what's the valuation of your home. This thing could range anywhere from $2,000, and this thing could go all the way up to $8,000 if you have a mansion. So you have to be mindful of the homeowner's insurance. And in addition to that, you also have property taxes. For those persons who have properties over 300,000, you have to also be mindful that, or you have other properties in other places, you have to be mindful that there's an annual property tax that is charged and you have to pay it. HOA fees is another one. Those who live behind certain gates or part of certain condominiums, there might be some HOA fees that you may also be responsible for paying. And this is the killer for a lot of persons in our society. We don't factor in the maintenance. We sometimes allow long periods to go by and then we try to do an overhaul and maintenance instead of trying to fix as we go throughout the years. And so maintenance is another big one I would say we have to put on the list as well. So that's renting, mortgage, or just providing some level of contribution, right? Outside of that, we have from um, HOA fees, property taxes. We also have home insurance. And last but not least, like I said, maintenance. Maintenance will be the last area for me.
Yeah, and that maintenance can also be this is if you own a home, things like even lawn care, putting in how
Yeah.
much you're paying to care for the lawn, things like that. Utilities, big, big huge expense
Yeah.
for a lot of us. Let's talk about utilities.
So, off the gate, everybody, the number one utility everybody wants to talk about is electricity costs. If you're in New Providence or any of the other family islands, it's PPL. If you're in Grand Bahama, of course, they have their electricity company as well. But electricity is the big one that everybody wants to talk about, and it's the one that most persons kind of give their attention to. But here's the interesting thing, and this is something that blows my mind. There is a money um, concept that exists in our in country that says don't pay the bill off in full. Leave a little something on the bill. Don't pay the bill off in full. Leave a little something on the bill. Believe it or not. And I find that for those persons who kind of use or deploy that tactic, especially if they have the capacity to pay off the bill, eventually find themselves or run themselves into the trouble that the bill gets too big and they will try to turn
Yeah,
it off if you don't pay the whole thing in full. And so we want to just be careful of those kind of advices.
with electricity.
Mhm.
When we were talking about housing, a lot of those costs are fixed expenses, right?
Yep.
Electricity is not a fixed expense. That fluctuate that can fluctuate up and down depending on the time of year, depending on who's visiting the house, or whatever. How do you budget for something like electricity, and expense that's not necessarily fixed and that can fluctuate? And sometimes, yes, you do have control over it. There's certain things that you can do, but then in a lot of cases,
There's some things you
you
can't.
don't have control. You
Yeah,
can't control.
there's
Yeah.
some things you can't. Um, this is such a sensitive area, I would say. I would normally tell persons we got to look back on what we paid in the last several months and let that be the gauge and be alert that in the event that if the bills goes up, because there will be some kind of public discourse or communication in regards to if the bill goes up, then we budget from there. But we have to look on average on what we spend. and what we spend during certain times of the month. And what you said is critical because in the summertime, if you have more persons home, of course, that bill is going to shoot up, especially if you turn it on the AC or the central air or the ductless unit, those kind of things. Or persons just home utilizing the gaming and streaming and all of these other devices that have to utilize electricity. So I think the key thing is understanding the base of how much we spend in our household. For some persons, when they were to look at how much they spend or generate in regards to a bill on a monthly basis, you realize that in some cases you may not even have enough to lend or put on the bill itself. So this is where you got to your point, look around the house and say, okay, where can we cut back? What could we turn off during the day when we're not in the home? What could we change some of the light bulbs? Could we put some of the devices on a surge protector that is also energy efficient? We need to now take these kind of measures and steps, like you said, which are more within our control. Of course, there will be some things that are completely out of our control. And the only thing we can do is, like I said, increase your income. One of the things I want to say is as we go through the budget itself, there are areas in the budget that we can cut back. And I would say cut back as much as you can. But at the same time, there are also areas in the budget that you may not be able to cut back any more that you do. And matter of fact, you're already operating in the red. And so you would need more income. And this is, like I said, going through this exercise, it makes us aware. It makes us aware. Outside of the electricity costs, you have things like water. Water and sewage for those who are connected to the water and sewage. There are some persons who have the private pump, which also lends to more electricity costs. And then last but not least, you have things like for those who have cable or those who have BTC, you have the internet, you have phones. And this is an interesting point that I've started to discover amongst many households. Many households are starting to turn off their landlines and just
Mhm.
have a cell bill, believe it or not. And then, of course,
Yeah.
internet. Internet is the big thing. So what I've also found that, you know, about 10 years ago, the internet bill was actually less than the phone bill. Now I'm seeing the reverse where persons want to stream and game and they're doing so much things inside their household, watch movies and that kind of thing that they're paying for bigger or higher packages in regards to the internet, and then their cell bill is being reduced or landline is being reduced tremendously as well.
One expense that you may have that you really should be assessing is what you're paying for streaming services. And I'm talking about streaming services such as Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime. A few months ago, I saw a preview for an episode of a TV series that looked really interesting. I went on YouTube to see if episodes were published there, and I couldn't find any. So, out of desperation, I reluctantly paid for a subscription to a streaming service to watch the series. I watched a few episodes and never logged back in again. Meanwhile, every month, my card is being charged. I would see the charge, say, oh yeah, I need to cancel that. And I end up forgetting because it's such a small charge. But every month, the charges add up, and that's money that could be used for my savings and other line items in my budget. So look at your streaming services and any other subscription services you may have and really ask yourself, am I using this? That may be an area you may be able to cut. So there's other things like, what groceries
Now
needs to
this
go
is a
into this
trouble area.
budget.
No, this is a really a trouble area. I let me come out the gate and say that this is a trouble. This is not an easy area. Groceries out of the
Yeah.
entire bill. This when you talk about fixed and variable costs, and when we say fixed and variable costs, I just want to make this as simple. When you say fixed, you already know at every month it's going to be a set amount every month. It is not going to change. And if it changes, you usually are notified at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the fiscal period of that particular company. But for the most part, it is the same amount every single month. Variable costs, it differs based on usage or based on consumption. So one month it could be low, the next month it could be high. It all depends on, and every month is not the same. Let me come out the gate. So those persons who have this idea that the budget should be a flat line and across the different. That's not even practical living. Grocery is a trouble area for us back home. Trouble area. The reason why I'm saying that is because prices are constantly going up. And as prices goes up, there are persons who find themselves in the position that their money that they have allocated for grocery is not enough to buy what they usually or used to buy in past years. In addition to that, what compounds the problem is persons who have to shop if they have little kids and those kind of things, and some of the products or brands that you bought for them, they are some now discontinued because the price point is just not favorable for for the vendor anymore. And then you have persons who are on who diets have to change and they want to eat healthier. And that becomes a complexing problem because healthier food in our country, as you know, is extremely expensive. And then those who are just trying to get by, and there's no shame in where you are in regards to your income and your expenses. But there are some persons who are just trying to get by. And so when you look at what $100 can buy you within the food store today, you back 15 years ago, almost close to 20 years ago, you could have filled up almost the whole trolley. Today, you can literally walk out with one bag and try to figure out what is in the bag. So, and I understand and I sympathize with you. So, what should you do? I'm raising these points, but I'm saying, what should you do? Well, this is where you have to come together now. This is where you have to approach it a little bit differently. So, my first instance is we may have to look at buying wholesale. We may have to go to more of the wholesalers to see if we could get it at a good price. The second thing we may have to look at is we may have to move away from some of the name brands. As long as it meets your nutritional value, we may have to move away from some of the name brands.
I want to share this. I remember coming home one break, and I went to the sink to wash the dishes. And normally we had Joy. And I'm looking and the brand is Beep. Like, what is Beep? What is Beep? Then I went into the laundry room. We always had Gain and Tide and,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
leading brands. Then now the brand is Extra.
Hmm.
Then what really solidified that, hey, things, there's been a shift. Um, I went to feed the dog. Normally we bought Pedigree, Alpo, the best of the best. I went and I got the food, the dog food. It was a brand called Skippy. And I laughed, but in hindsight, I was like, wow, my mom, a lot of people are not living and facing the reality that their financial circumstances have
Has changed.
changed.
Has changed.
Has it,
You're right.
it has changed, and so you've got to shift gears
Mhm.
and live within your means, live within your budget.
I couldn't say it any better myself. I totally agree with what you're saying. And recognize that it's time to make the shift. And you know what sometimes get us tripped up is the fact that we don't want anybody to see that we had to make the shift or we had to make the change. But I've come
We
to
don't want ourselves to see as well. We don't want to face it.
no, we don't want to face it head on. Like I said, we
Mhm.
prefer the unknown. And believe it or not, and there are some persons who never had the option where they're buying
That's true.
these brands, and even these brands for them are becoming expensive. I would say
Yeah.
that group, you're gonna have to. I know we don't like to do it. I know persons will say they talk about it, but I could say to you, I've been a part of it, and it really changed my outlook on life. It got to a point in my life that one of the places that I worked in the past, we had a staff complement of about 350 persons at this particular company. Not all 350, but a large majority, more so the mature ones within the organization, they they were in a position where they kind of come together once a month and they would buy groceries from the US and they would bring it in and they would split the cost. And it blew my mind to see it. I had to observe it first. I'm like, hold on, I ain't too sure about this. But when I saw the truck came in, because we had to get one of those my trucks, and then almost like 40 foot pilots that could fit in a 40-foot container. When they drop that in the yard and everybody pick up what they would have purchased, it opened my eyes to the fact that I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this. And if I partner up with persons who are purchasing at a price point that I could afford for my family, and as a result of it, I participated in it for a period of time whilst I was still at that particular organization. And I can say to you, it helped tremendously because I didn't have to catch a plane. It came in on a regular, it was almost clockwork. And also, I split the cost with that cost was split among so many individuals. So you may not have a big organization like I did, but you have family members and friends and those who are in civic, social, religious environments who are prepared and open to do these kind of things. Just make sure you pick somebody who's like-minded, and if you're going to engage
And you
in something
trust.
like that, and persons, yeah,
Yeah.
because there's been some incidents in the past, but just be like-minded people who you trust if you're going to engage in something like that. Yeah.
Do you think it's important to, because when you go grocery shopping, you're not only just picking up groceries, you're picking up household cleaners, you're
Yes,
also
you are.
picking up toiletries. So in your budget, should these be broken down separately, or do you have just one total amount for groceries that encompasses the household cleaning items and the personal care toiletry items?
I think it depends on the individual. So if you're dealing with just a person on their own, and it's just really just them, you can kind of almost categorize everything under one. But if you're dealing with somebody who has more than just them, they could have other dependents inside the household. We may have to categorize this thing because you have to see where you're spending the money. For someone who has
I was going to say
young
that.
young kids who are participating in extracurricular activities, you'll find that those cleaning supplies and those laundry supplies, those things start to, tack up. They become like more and more and more expensive as compared to somebody who's just empty nesters or somebody who's just living on their own. So I would say it all depends on the individual, but you have to see it because that's the only way for you to make the pivot if it is higher. And especially in personal care. Personal care, we're very in this area. I find that it's really comes down to what a person is trying to achieve. Personal care for different individuals is a very it's one of those sensitive areas in the sense of there are persons who are only, regardless of how much they make, they're only going to buy certain hair care products, skin care products, things of that nature. You understand what I'm saying? Because they're trying to achieve a particular goal at the end of the day. And nothing wrong with that. But I'm just saying it's good to also be mindful of how much these things are cost.
We're almost at the end of the episode, and there's still more expenses to go through. If you'd like the full list of expenses, go online to moneysensewithsheandra.com and look for the blog post for episode 1, Creating and Managing a Household Budget. There you'll find key takeaways from today's episode, the full list of expenses, as well as recommended tools you can use to draft your budget and track your spending so that you stay within your budget when spending. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. This was a great show. Nathaniel, I want you to share how do people get in touch with you? If somebody wants, at the top of the show, we talked about financial planning,
Yeah.
how if somebody wants your assistance with budgeting, how do they get in touch with you?
Great question. So I would say reach out to us at Drewber Solutions, and Drewber is spelled Drewber Solutions with an S.com, or you can reach us at 242-427-8025. That's 242-427-8025.
That's it for today's coaching session. I hope you found it helpful. Don't forget, visit moneysensewithsheandra.com to view the blog post on financial planning, as well as the blog post for this episode, episode 1, Creating and Managing a Household Budget. Also, if you haven't yet, subscribe to the Money Sense with Sheandra YouTube channel and follow the show on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Lastly, I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments on YouTube or wherever the show is published what you thought about this episode. Your feedback is what's going to make this show successful. Thanks for tuning in. I will see you all next time.